Hi, this is David Leaf here for Omnibus Press, the publishers of God Only Knows, the story of Brian Wilson, the Beach Boys, and the California Myth, which hits the stores and Amazon.co UK in June of this year, June 23rd to be exact. I'm going to answer the questions that have been posted at my Facebook page. Some pretty deep ones too, and I've only got 20 minutes, so let's get to it. Tom Bell asks, I have this book, the original edition he's referring to, and I've read several times. I've even loaned it to friends who weren't knowledgeable about the greatness that are the Beach Boys and Brian Wilson, but became fans after they read it. So you converted some new fans with a little help from me. Thank you, Tom. Is this the same book as the one you just posted about on your Facebook page? Is it repackaged with a different title or a completely different book? Really good questions, Tom. Actually, it's both. The new title was chosen by me to better reflect the content. So it's clear that first and foremost, this book is about Brian Wilson. But in a sense, it is repackaged. The update is so long. I think it's fair to say the update could have been a book all of its own. And Omnibus Press is publishing it at such a reasonable price. So in a sense, you'll be getting two books for the price of one. Now, you have the old edition. This book has a very different style. There's some photographs scattered throughout the book, but in the center, there's an 8-page color section with some incredible pictures, some even I'd never seen before, so I think you're gonna like that. When Omnibus and I started talking about this book last October, my goal was that it would be the old book plus everything I'd written about Brian since, and they said, no, we want an update. So I agreed to that. But I wanted to make it very clear to them, and I think it's important for everybody else, that this is a significant update, because I knew there would be a lot of people who would say, I have the first edition, I have the second edition, maybe you even have both. Why do I need to buy this new book? So I made this sure. This new update is massive. In terms of word count, it's over 60,000 words. Now, to give you a sense of what that means, the 1978 book, the original edition, was 95,000 words. So this book is over half the size of the original book. The 1985 edition has been out of print since 1986. A lot of people who wanted to read that, so we've kind of combined it and come up with this new edition, which combines the old and the new. Amazing material in here, including original contributions, exclusive ones from Sir Barry Gibb, Sir Paul McCartney, Jimmy Webb, one of the greatest songwriters of all time, Melinda Wilson is Brian's wife, and as I said earlier, some visual material that no one has seen before. Let's get to another question. Xander Sumner, which time periods did you enjoy writing and researching for this new edition? Actually, Xander, I enjoyed writing almost everything in the new edition because it's such a big part of my life. The only chapter I really found it difficult to write was the one about the 1980s and the early 1990s, and that's because it was the time when Brian was under the control of Dr. Landy. It was a really tough time for everybody who loved Brian and for Brian more than anybody. And yet it was during that era that he made what I think is his best solo album. So it's a very complicated time to write about. It was so much fun to write about the 2001 Radio City musical tribute to Brian Wilson. I mean, the 2004 Beautiful Dreamers Smile film, I loved it all. And to give you an idea of how much I enjoy writing about Brian, in the middle of writing this update, I got a request to write an essay for his new tour book. And I was like, yeah, sure, okay. So I dropped working on the book, quickly wrote an essay for the tour book, and then went back to this. I mean, when I was working on this update, this gives you a sense of how much I love writing about Brian. I didn't want to go to sleep at night, and I couldn't wait to get up in the morning and get started again. I really love writing about Brian. I really do. This question comes from David Beard, the editor and publisher of Endless Summer Quarterly. The question is, David, we've known one another for a long time. what compelled you to first write the book in 1978? Geez, David, really? I mean, we just did this massive interview for your magazine, ESQ. In fact, if you're not a subscriber, it goes on sale, single editions, June 24th. And that's the day after the book comes out in England. And it's the day that the Beach Boys are at Royal Albert Hall. Okay, enough plugs. David, to answer your question, when I was in college in 1969, I was a freshman, and I was going to George Washington University in DC. It was a very, very contentious time. It was in the middle of the anti-war movement. There was a lot of racial rioting, civil rights demonstrations. It was really an angry time in America. And in my freshman journalism class, I read a biography of a man named Edward R. Murrow, one of the great broadcast journalists of all time. And I came to understand that as a journalist, one could use your work to create positive change and have a positive impact on the world. And so I'm filled with this youthful, naive outrage when I'm in college. And I understood what was going on in America, or at least I thought I did. I remember going to see Norman Mailer speak at Lafayette Park, right across the street from the White House, in September of '69. And all of a sudden, the civil disturbance unit of the Washington, D.C. police came at us with clubs raised. And hey, I'd read the Constitution. This was lawful assembly. We weren't doing anything, but they chased us with their clubs. They were ready to beat the heck out of us. I remember one day waking up in my dorm, the day of a big demonstration on campus. And my dorm was 5 blocks from the White House, and George Washington University was considered to be the kind of the launching pad for big demonstrations. And I remember raising the blinds on my dorm room around 7:30 in the morning of that day, and the 81st Airborne Division, or 82nd Airborne, was getting out of armored vehicles and surrounding the campus so we couldn't leave. And I remember turning to my roommate and saying, "What's going on? Are we in Venezuela?" I mean, it was just terrifying. And so in the fall of 1971, I was a sports writer, and then I stumbled upon the story of Smile and Brian Wilson. And I had this crazy idea, and I write about this a lot in the update. Very simply, I got the idea that I'm going to move to California, write a book about Brian Wilson, become his friend, and help him finish Smile. Now, where that came from, well, you'll have to read the update to see what I have to say about it. It only took 33 years from the time I first thought it to the time it happened. But, I didn't really tell too many people that was why I moved to California. In fact, I don't think I told anyone other than my college roommate. But the first person I told when I moved to LA, well, I revealed who that was in the book, and that's a pretty cool surprise. John Manning asks, well, this is a really tough question. Many fans feel that the earlier editions of your book underplayed the contributions made to the Beach Boys' legacy by Carl, Dennis, Al, Dave, and especially Mike. Do you accept that criticism? Do you address that balance in this new edition? Or do you reckon you got it right the first time? 3 good questions, John. Wow. In short, yes, yes, yes. Now, I'm not saying that to be a smart, wise guy. I think it's fair criticism that the title of the book might have seemed a bit misleading. It's why this new book is called God Only Knows, the Story of Brian Wilson, before we hear about the Beach Boys. Because the original title, might have given people a different impression. This book clearly lets you know that Brian is first and foremost in the book. That said, John, the first sentence in the first edition of the book was, "This is the story of Brian Wilson." So it should have been clear that was the story I set out to write. And I focused on that. I focused on the origin story of Brian and the Wilson family and the group. And I focused on the most important eras of the Beach Boys music. Now, because Brian was the composer, arranger, and producer of that music, naturally he was the central focus. Because Smile was so important, he was the creator of Smile. Because Pet Sounds was so important. It got its own chapter. Now, I think I made it clear, or I hope I did in the book, how much I love the Beach Boys music, how much I love the Beach Boys. I still do. I wrote a lot about the music in the book, and I write a lot about the music in this book. But in researching the book, going all the way back to the mid-'60s, what you see from the first time there's any serious writing about Brian and the Beach Boys, Brian is almost always the focus of it. So I was just kind of following down that path. That was what I those were the people who I respected from what they wrote. When I started researching my book, everybody I spoke to, Audrey Wilson, Brian's earliest collaborators, the guy who signed the Beach Boys to Capitol Records, Tony Escher and Van Dyke Parks, Chuck Britz, who was in the studio engineering all the Beach Boys vocal sessions, he said, as far as I'm concerned, Brian Wilson is the Beach Boys. Now, that wasn't a minority opinion. Dennis Wilson himself was quoted as saying, Brian is the Beach Boys, we're his messengers. So if Dennis felt that way, I felt that that was a very legitimate way to look at it. So I took my cue from that. Now, obviously, the Beach Boys' harmonies are incredible. Carl's voice, heavenly, is really the only way to describe it. Dennis became a great songwriter. I love his solo work. And I'm not oblivious to the fact that some fans felt I should have written more about the others. So in this new edition, there's a really lengthy, what I've titled an author's note, in which I do address the balance you asked me about in your question, or as some people might feel, an imbalance. I write at length at what drove me to write the book and how it happened. It's a book about Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys. That's the way it should be looked at. Now, in the new edition, we have contributions from Sir Paul McCartney and Sir Barry Gibb and Jimmy Webb. They're writing about Brian Wilson because that's who they're in love with musically. Same with Brian's wife, Melinda. She's in love with Brian. So all of that stuff precedes the original book, and then following the original book, there's the 1985 update. Then there's this lengthy author's note where I talk about all the things you've asked me about, and then a gigantic update. To your question, did I get it right the first time? I really think that's up for the reader to decide. I think that's same with the update. I can only say that in the nearly 40 years since the book was in print, whenever I've interviewed somebody on the subject, Sir George Martin, or I've worked with Sir Elton John or Lindsey Buckingham or Peter Buck of REM, so many others, they always wanted to know about Brian because their focus was on music. And mine has been on the artist who made that music. So I hope that answers your question. Dan Gibson sends in this one. Hey Dan, it's really good to hear from you. We are both extremely longtime fans. Dan writes, I know you probably have been asked this a dozen times before, but I can't help but wonder, why did you use a pic on the cover that does not have Al in it? And then he goes on to say, we've all heard the stories of why Alan didn't make the cover photo shoot for the Summer Days and Summer Nights album cover. And Dan asks, does this pic hold some other special significance to you? Well, actually, Dan, believe it or not, you're the first person to ask. It's a very fair question. First, the picture holds no special significance to me other than I think Brian looks great in it. The publisher actually chose the picture. I wanted to put a picture of Brian on the front cover. They felt that a picture, because the title was Brian Wilson, The Beach Boys, The California Myth, we should see the Beach Boys in the mid-'60s, near the beach, near the ocean, something like that. There have been a lot of books on the Beach Boys. So we couldn't really use a picture that had been on cover of one of those books. And I wanted to use on the cover the picture of the Beach Boys in the tent in Brian's living room. That had been on the cover of a book. So we ended up with what we did. And, actually, Dan, now that I think of it, it's a good question to ask the Beach Boys, because it's kind of strange when you think about it. In 1965, Al missed the boat when they took the cover photo, and neither Capitol Records or the Beach Boys felt, hey, we've got to reschedule the shoot to get him on the cover of the album. I think that's a lot stranger than it being on the cover of my book. Andy Burns asks, I'd love to hear about the balancing act that you likely encountered in returning to this book while also having a long-standing relationship with Brian. Andy, that is such a great question. It's one that I talk about in depth in one section of the book, because honestly, it's a question that everybody who's a friend of Brian's grapples with, because we're asked publicly about him on the record, and you don't want to say anything that's going to betray the friendship. So I had to really, everything I wrote about him in this update, I had to really think to myself, is this something that should be on the public record? And there are a lot of stories I left out because it was just too personal. It really wasn't that it wasn't anybody's business, but it didn't belong in this book, because it wouldn't be right for the relationship I have with Brian to put it in there. That said, there's a lot of great stuff. Here's something that's really cool that's in the new edition. In the first book that came out in '78 and the updated edition in '85, there were a number of friends of Brian who spoke anonymously. One of those friends has done an interview with me for this edition of the book, and this person has revealed their identity, and the interview material I got from that person for this book is among the most fascinating stuff in this update. So I think you're going to really like this person's commentary. Now, these next two questions come from old friends from England, Liz and Ange Jones. Liz sends in this question. What was it that made you so interested in Brian Wilson's music? Which is your favorite album? Do you prefer Brian Wilson Presents Smile over the original recorded but unreleased tracks that ended up on the Brian Wilson, on the Beach Boys Smile sessions? So to your first question, I talk about it at length in the update, but as to why I got so deep into the story. Very simply, in 1971, there was an article in Rolling Stone magazine, a two-part story on the Beach Boys, October, November '71, and when I read it, I was fascinated. I was fascinated by the story of Smile. At the same time, the Surf's Up album came out and had two songs on it that really kind of blew my mind, if you will. One was Surf's Up, the title song, which to me proved that everything that was in the Rolling Stone article they were saying about Smile was true, was accurate. It was like, my God, a whole album with music like that? I have to hear that album. The other song that really touched me and broke my heart then and breaks my heart to this day is a song called Till I Die. And that was Brian at his absolute best. So the album, the song Till I Die and Surf's Up, and the Rolling Stone article, that's what got me into it. Now you asked, which is my favorite Beach Boys album? Well, if I have to answer today, I'm going to say the Beach Boys Today. If you ask me tomorrow, it'll probably be a different answer. But Beach Boys Today is really one of my favorites. Now your other question. This is a really interesting question. How do I compare Brian Wilson Presents Smile and the original Smile recordings? Nobody's asked me that before. The Smile recordings from the 60s are the mother lode of the musical magic that Brian Wilson made, that created the Smile legend. We heard bits and pieces of it trickle out through the years. When I first heard about Smile, I didn't know that Our Prayer and Cabinescence from 2020 were from Smile. Then when I moved to LA and I started meeting other collectors, we were trading tapes and I got to hear a lot of the unreleased music. That was incredible. Then in 1993, it was amazing to me that and I write about all this in the book, that I had Brian allowed us to put the original Smile recordings on the Good Vibrations box set, which I produced with Andy Paley. And I thought that was kind of it. I didn't think it would go any further. Brian Wilson Presents Smile is untoppable. There is nothing I've experienced in my life that was anything like being at Royal Festival Hall on February 20th, 2004. Seeing that music, I honestly, I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about that moment. So it was incredible. Was Brian's voice the same as it had been in 1966, 67? No, of course not. As great as Brian's band is at singing, are they the Beach Boys? They are not. The DNA of the Wilson Love blend with Al Jardine, there's nothing like it. However, that experience in London was so incredible that getting the Smile session 7 years later, it just wasn't as exciting to me. Seeing Brian do Smile live in London, I don't know about you, but very rarely in life does anything live up to expectations. This exceeded expectations. And the Smile sessions, they're great to have. They're historic. I mean, they're just amazing. But nothing is ever going to touch seeing Brian do Smile in London, at least for me. And now here's a question from your sister. Hi, Ange. I hope all is well. Haven't seen you in a long time. Here's a question. How did your book, The Beach Boys and the California Myth, affect the group and Brian? Boy, I don't know exactly how to answer that. With Brian, it's kind of simple. Brian's friends told him that the book had done right by him, so that's how he and I became friends. As to the other Beach Boys, it's kind of a mixed bag, in that Dennis, and there's a story in the book. I'm not going to tell you now. In the updated edition, Dennis read the book and he called me at 3:00 in the morning. You'll read what happened in the update. Carl was, as always, gracious, gentlemanly. He signed a copy of it for me. I don't think Al particularly liked it, and based on what Mike wrote in his autobiography, I'm pretty sure he really doesn't like it. However, what I found out, and I have a long welcoming section in this brand new edition, and I spoke to people who read the book back in the 70s and 80s and 90s, and it ranges from Elliot Easton from the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame group The Cars, to Peter Carlin, who wrote a great book, biography on Brian and the Beach Boys, to Jason Fine, who's the editor-in-chief of Rolling Stone and was in the Long Promised Road movie with Brian, and Van Dyke Parks talked about me in the book, and what Van Dyke had to say actually it made me cry. So, and then on top of it, Darian Sahanaja, who's been Brian's musical director for 22 years, it's amazing what he has to say. So the book is the book. Nothing can touch the Beach Boys' musical legacy. They're in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. The fact that the book touched these other people really, makes me very proud. Here's a question from Amy Perhatch. Of the various projects you've worked on about Brian and the Beach Boys, what have been your favorites? You've certainly done some really great ones, so I'm very curious which one you would choose. Ooh, thank you, Amy. I'm gonna make this simple because I write about these. I'm going to mention two projects. I write about both of them a lot in the update. One is the 2001 All-Star tribute to Brian that was at Radio City Music Hall. The other was making The Beautiful Dreamer, Brian Wilson and the Story of Smile film, which was, from my point of view, one of the best things I've ever done as a director. The tribute, the amazing people who were there that night: Paul Simon, Billy Joel, Elton John, Jimmy Webb, Carly Simon, David Crosby, Sir George Martin, the Boys Choir of Harlem, Wilson Phillips reunited for it, the Go-Go's, heart. I mean, it was just goosebumps just thinking about it. Making this Smile movie with Brian, and how that happened is quite a story, and I tell it in the book. That put me in the middle of everything as it unfolded. So I had this entire experience of watching it come together and getting to tell the story so the whole world could see. So those are my two favorite. I know we're running out of time. More than one of you sent me messages with this question: why did it take you so long for you to update the book? Well, honestly, I was busy with my career. I was making documentaries like The U.S. versus John Lennon, The Night James Brown Saved Boston, produced Who Was Harry Nilsson, Why Is Everybody Talking About Him? I made a film on the Bee Gees, This Is Where I Came In, dozens and dozens of other great television projects that I got to work on. And it really wasn't on my radar. And then with Brian's approaching 80th birthday, I thought, this is the time to do it. I think the difference between then and now is very simply put. When I originally wrote the book, I was an outsider looking in. And in this book, I'm an insider telling the story. And that's what I think makes God Only Knows such a great journey for me to share with all of you. In 1977, I was on a mission. Now I feel like, given Brian's amazing solo career, the mission has been accomplished. I hope you all agree. So it's called God Only Knows: The Story of Brian Wilson, the Beach Boys, and the California Myth. It's out in the UK on June 23rd, in the US probably around September 22nd, early autumn. And I hope you like it as much as I loved writing it.